Hi, welcome back. And thank you for being here and for being patient with the unscheduled nature of these meditations and reflections. This has become a sacred space for me, and I hope it is, or possibly will be, for you. It is remarkable to me how our world keeps providing us with reasons to seek a safe place, a quiet refuge, a momentary suspension of the intensity of our lives. This week was no different, so let us begin with our break to breathe before we continue with some reflections and observations. And before we even break to breathe, let me just share with you, I'm in Chicago. I am not in Cleveland, and I am in a space over which I have no control. So we may be interrupted. If we are, I will end and then begin again when I can, so that you will not be subjected to the interruption. All right, with that word of, technological warning, let us assume our meditative places and positions and our accustomed way of being for these times we spend together. Our feet on the floor, or as close to the floor as we can get them, or whatever is comfortable, or lying on the floor, or standing, whatever works for you. And let us take that inventory that allows us to breathe as deeply as possible. So let us release our heads and jaws and our ears, our necks, which we might roll a bit. And it's a classic shoulder release to scrunch them up to your ears even, and then to let them go. And following the upper arms, the lower arms, our wrists. We hold a lot of tension in our wrists. Let's just wave them around, and our hands, our fingers, let them rest in our laps. And let us go from our jaws and necks into our insides and try to let go of our lungs, of our tummies. I always say how much they hold our tensions, I believe. Our waists and hips and thighs and lower legs, knees. We can just kind of wave our legs back and forth, maybe even against each other. Twirl our ankles, lift and lower our feet, wiggle our toes, all those things that make us aware of where we might hold those tensions and hold those anxieties, and try to just let them go right now. They will come flooding back, don't worry. But it's so good to try to release them for just a few moments. And let us breathe deeply. And even without letting what you've taken in go, breathe again. Filling the spaces from the tops of our heads, from the backs of our heads or the front of our heads, down through our faces or into our mouths, down our necks, into our bodies, filling every place with air instead of tension. Let us imagine that at any rate. It's a good image. Air is filling us from top to bottom into every extremity. And then when we can feel it throughout our bodies, or imagine it throughout our bodies, we can release. I encourage you to enjoy the release and to rest for however many seconds your body allows you to do so before inhaling the next one. And you can do this on your own timetable. You don't have to match mine or try to hold it for so many seconds. Some breaths may be deeper and fuller and longer than others. Others may be shorter. You might that might feel good to you. By all means, find the rhythm, find the pattern that suits you. I encourage you to try different ones from week to week or day to day. But whatever seems to be working right now is the right rhythm for you. I try to luxuriate in the fullness of it, in the consciousness of it, in the focused moment of actually feeling myself breathe. There are days, I'm sure you have them, when I finally take that deep breath, I realize I've been breathing all along, obviously, but it's been an anxious, shallow, hurried breathing. So let us take our time. Inhale deeply, healingly, fully. And exhale again. It occurs to me that even as the COVID pandemic seems to be diminishing, we can never let down our guard against the far more virulent pandemics of evil, tyranny, lies, racism, sexism, narcissism, egotism. We all could go on and on. We thought we had learned something. We thought we had resolved our baser instincts and feelings. We thought we were better than what we are seeing. The COVID-19 pandemic held up a mirror to our lives and to the nature of our communities, a mirror we did not want to see. I have watched, with a mixture of horror and disbelief, the unleashing of sentiments, of hateful and hurtful impulses we thought we would never hear or see again. In the aftermath of World War II, the unrest and upheaval of the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the LGBTQ movement, the efforts on behalf of Native Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and every disadvantaged group. It seems to me that we had been in such an expansive and expanding place that this backlash has come as a complete and astonishing surprise. As I said, we thought we were better than this. Last week, I had the unusual opportunity to help chaperone 24 honors students from the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Center for the Humanities at our Cuyahoga County Community College on a civil rights trip to Alabama I have the privilege of sitting on the National Advisory Board of the Mandel Humanities Center, and thus the invitation to join them. Our visit to Alabama began in Montgomery at the Civil Rights Memorial Center, the Rosa Parks Museum, and a most stimulating visit to the Levi Watkins Library of Alabama State University, where a Dr. Robinson was a most passionate historian of the civil rights movement, of everything that led up to it, and of every detail of the movement itself. It wasn't just that he had an encyclopedic knowledge of the era and its antecedents. He passionately wanted us to know it as well. He is a remarkable teacher, always with one more story, one more anecdote, and one more association he wanted to be sure we knew. He helped put into context what we had seen at the memorial earlier in the day, and Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat on that fateful day, December 1st, 1955, an act of courage and defiance that sparked the Montgomery bus boycott and helped to galvanize the entire civil rights movement. We learned about heroic individuals, some of whose names we knew, but so many others who are unknown, unsung, and unrecognized. Dr. Robinson's passion and erudition set the tone for our entire trip. This was a journey to acquire knowledge and to ignite and enlist our souls in the fight against ignorance, inequity, and injustice. I believe it succeeded brilliantly on both counts. We were exposed to a wealth of information that should have been daunting. For me, I lived through so much of what was being taught that I remembered bits and pieces of it, so that it made me hungry to fill in all of the history. For most of the students, this was new information, but it is recent history and the ongoing, unfortunately, living reality of their lives, so that the learning had immediate relevance and impact. The learning also had an experiential quality to it, as we visited the First Baptist Church of Montgomery, where freedom riders were surrounded by a mob outside the church. The story of that terrifying event was shared with us. There's the interruption. I will return. Let me begin by apologizing for the interruption. I'll back up just a couple of sentences and we will proceed. I just had no control today. So thank you for your patience and your tolerance. As we were saying, the learning had an experiential quality to it. As we visited the First Baptist Church of Montgomery, where freedom riders were surrounded by a mob outside the church. The story of that terrifying event was shared with us by a man who was a teenager in the church at the time. We rode from Selma to Montgomery and walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where our young John Lewis marched as a protester against racism and in favor of registering Black voters. On the second day of the trip, we visited Birmingham and the 16th Street Baptist Church, where 4 young girls were killed in a bombing on Christmas Day, and where the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is located. We visited Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth's Bethel Baptist Church, which was also bombed on several occasions, and where he provided extraordinary leadership. Every stop, every teaching, every meal of Southern cuisine was a deeply moving and enlightening highlight. But on the third and final day in Alabama, we met Anthony Ray Hinton, the man who served 30 years in solitary confinement on death row for a crime he never committed. He spoke to us of his experience, of the never-ending trauma of it, of his feelings, and of his will to go on. He signed copies of his book, The Sun Does Shine, and agreed to pose with us for pictures. With his words as backdrop, we visited the Legacy Museum and the devastatingly powerful National Memorial of Peace and Justice. Both the museum, both the museum and the memorial are products of the Equal Justice Initiative, a nonprofit organization founded by Bryan Stevenson to provide legal representation to prisoners wrongly convicted of crimes, poor prisoners without effective representation, and others who may have been denied a fair trial. Bryan Stevenson is the author of Just Mercy, and the man who finally argued Anthony Ray Hinton's case that resulted in his release from incarceration and cleared of all charges. The two together, the Legacy Museum and the Memorial to Victims of Racial Lynching, provide an intense and profoundly disturbing experience of what slavery in this country truly meant and continues to engender. The Legacy Museum is located on the site of a former warehouse where Black people were forced to labor in Montgomery, Alabama. The museum uses contemporary means of interactive media, sculpture, videography, and exhibits that seem to live and breathe their story, to immerse visitors in the sights and sounds of the slave trade, racial terrorism, the Jim Crow South, and the world's largest prison system. It is a rare and compelling opportunity to investigate and to be immersed in, albeit briefly, our country's history of racial injustice and its legacy. I realize that this sounds more like a lecture or a lesson than a reflection. It is hard to describe the enormity of what I experienced with the students and how grateful I am to have been there, to have my consciousness raised further, and to see the horrors through the students' eyes as well. That was a unique and exceedingly meaningful part of this trip. I will also share with you one sentence that Anthony Ray Hinton shared with us. He said, "The justice system in this country isn't broken. It works just the way it is supposed to." The exhibits that we saw draw a straight line from slavery to sharecropping, to convict labor, to lynching, to incarceration. It is a terrible tale that affects and impacts us all. While all that I have reflected here deserves far greater illumination and discussion, I would share with you two final thoughts. I promise. The first is that I was overwhelmed by the measured, straightforward, yet determined responses of the students. They were a racially, demographically, and even generationally diverse group, and yet throughout, they behaved with respect toward each other and the experience we were all sharing. They emerged with a sense of determination to make the world better, but not with violence or terror of their own. They see a better way and seem to understand the complexity of human nature and human beings. The other thought that is far more predictable. My children accused me of always bringing things back to a Jewish lens, and they are right. My other thought, especially as we are approaching our festival of Passover, is how relevant our Jewish tradition continues to be. Its ancient call of justice, justice shall you pursue, takes on crucial and immediate meaning in every age and in every generation. We may lament the nature of our world that seems to pursue its destructive paths, but we cannot give up, we cannot despair, and we are constantly called to renew our efforts and try to bring both sanity and equity to our world. I have been teaching from the first chapters of Genesis in a class for the Siegel Lifelong Learning Program, and it continues to astound me that according to our Torah, Abraham and Sarah were chosen at least in part because Abraham argued on behalf of the innocent residents of Sodom and Gomorrah. He challenges God. Will you indeed sweep away the innocent along with the wicked? Far be it from you. Must not the judge of all the earth do justly? Must not the judge of all the earth do justly? If God acts justly, so must we, as God's divine creations. We have been taught the principles of equality, freedom, dignity, justice, and yet the world continues to ignore what we learned as children. It reinforces for me the essential nature of our mission and purpose as Jews on this earth. The ultimate purpose of the Passover Seder is not to despair or to give up, but to rise from the table in the experience of reliving our own slavery and exodus from Egypt with a renewed commitment to making the goals of that ancient time alive and real in ours. So, with thoughts of a better future, let us breathe again and breathe in a sense of renewal, of attentiveness, of focus, of purpose, every day of our lives, in big and especially in the small ways we are each called upon to serve. Let us breathe deeply, the air of our own freedom, and how precious that is. There are certainly other discussions that could take place. But for now, let us breathe in this moment, in this space together, in this place of reflection and meditation, so that we might focus more clearly on the things we can do every day of our lives that are beneficial and uplifting and supportive of others, every other in our communities, I hope you will continue to breathe deeply, and to allow these few moments of safe haven, of renewal, of retreat from the world, to restore you and invigorate you. By way of conclusion of this session, however, formally, I can think of no more appropriate thoughts than those of Maya Angelou in her poem, Caged Bird. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill. For the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn. And he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill. For the caged bird sings of freedom. Our tradition teaches us that not one of us is truly free as long as any individual is not. And so we give thanks for the freedoms we enjoy while we focus again and again and again on those who are oppressed and without the gifts to which they are entitled. I pray that you will have a good week, a week of worthy endeavor, of fulfilling endeavor, and I look forward to seeing you again next time as we continue this journey down so many paths together. God bless. Take care and be well.